Welcome, welcome. My name is Studio Bila, otherwise known as the Expressionist, and this is my first live stream with Sony Alpha. Quite excited to be here. A little bit nervous because I've never done this before. It's my first time, so do bear with me as we explore the world of Sony Alpha, and in particular today of this incredible little camera called the A7C. C stands for compact, and I had the opportunity to play around with it. So before we proceed, I've got some excellent news if you're looking to do a couple of things, and it's how we pay the bills. It's how I do something for you as fellow photographers and image makers and content creators, and that is one simple thing. So Sony's giving us the opportunity to put some cash back in your pocket. There's a 10% cash back basically anytime you decide to buy products. This code is relevant for 15 days. So make sure that once you've purchased your Sony product from whichever retailer that you are accustomed to and that you always visit, go to www.cashbacks.co.za, type in all your invoice information, and once you've done that, they will reimburse you 10% of whatever your purchase is within 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. But there is a disclaimer. There's always a disclaimer, isn't there? And the disclaimer is there's a few Sony products that won't be on the list that you would get this cash back on, and those are the 400mm f2.8, the 600mm f4, the A9 Mark II, the A7R3, the A7S3, and the A7C, because some of those already are discounted by quite a bit, and some of these are very new products, so they're not available yet. So, you know, they want to get the demand out there. So just so you are aware of those things. So yeah, now that the nitty-gritties are out of the way, let's get into the fun part. And that's me taking you through the A7SC, how I found it, the workings of it, the machinations of my mind on a couple of shoots that I worked on. And by the way, I almost forgot, I'm taking questions as we go through this. So whether you're watching directly through Sony Alpha Universe, or on the YouTube page, or on Facebook, field your questions from wherever, and I'll be happy to answer them as they come. And they can be specifically about the A7SC, or they can be about my creative process, or about me as a creative slash artist slash worker bee in the creatives field. And yeah, we'll just take it as it comes. But I want it to be interactive. I want it to be fun. I want it to be light. So make sure you ask those questions, because it'll make my life easier. Because it's ironic, I don't enjoy talking, but here I am on a live stream. So let's do it together. Cool. So I'm going to take you into a little presentation for 3 projects that I worked on quite recently. And the first of these was actually a project that was envisioned with the Sony Alpha team. And we had to test the A7SC. And they kind of gave us a relatively open brief, but it was based on our shooting style. That is myself and Cedric Nzaka, who's another Sony Alpha ambassador, and Ian, who's another Sony Alpha ambassador. And we kind of had to work in isolation, but together. And I think that's something we're all accustomed to in the world of COVID. And yeah, we had fun with it because, you know, we have our wheelhouses or our specificities as creatives that we work on. And the name of the game was lean into what you're comfortable with, what people know you for, or flip the script and change it completely into something that people aren't even familiar with. And that was the fun that we had on the Obscura shoots. So I'll take you through the slides. It was really fun to work on this. This image in particular, because we obviously had a brief that had to highlight specific features of the A7SC, and for me, low light shooting is something that I'm not that I'm not familiar with it, but I don't do it very often. So this was an opportunity to play and really push the boundaries of what the A7SC could do, and I really had fun with this because it performed phenomenally shooting this low-key kind of light we had to experiment with the lighting, and you know, the whole time I was confident that my images were going to come out crisp and clean, particularly because this camera has a 24.2 megapixel camera, which means, you know, the images are going to be crisp. If I'm shooting in the raw files and I export those, and I'm shooting for a billboard or a commercial campaign, I don't have to worry about, you know, too much noise or too much pixelation, because that sensor is incredible. I mean, compared to, you know, the first camera that I bought had something like a 10 or 12 megapixel camera, and this has double that in a full frame body. On a full frame sensor rather, but in a very compact body. Yeah, I knew it was going to do the trick. And setting up this lighting was also, you know, an experiment. If you look at my Instagram or my website, I like to shoot very kind of soft, diffused, pastel kind of colors, and that's because I'm colorblind, by the way, so don't hold that against me. So yeah, moving on to the next image. Again, because the shoot was named Obscura, the key was not to only show the sharpness and the reliability of these images, and of the sensor and of the camera, but also to kind of experiment into distorting things. And the way that I got this is we took jars and vases and we kind of placed them in front of the lens to distort, once I'd kind of locked in on my focus, which takes me to something else that I really loved about this camera, which was the detection phases. And it has 693 detection phases, which is quite phenomenal if you think about how you work as a photographer or a videographer in composition. So with the image on the left that's got the obscuration, if that's even a word, that's obscure, we took, like I said, the image, focused in on it, and then I recomposed it using that extra bit of glass in front of the lens. And that's where those detection phase points, all 693 of them, really became useful and became critical in the way that I shaped the style and the composition of the shots. So I'm going to check for some questions before we move on to the next shindig. See if anybody is asking me anything. So if you see me look off screen, I'm not being rude. I'm just checking on the questions on my other laptop, making sure that I'm staying in touch with everybody. Cool. And this is kind of my pièce de résistance when it comes to Obscura. Shot the image, I think I was probably at like F5 or F6, because I really wanted to kind of define the model against this red light that we used. But something else that I wanted was very simple. It was definition and contrast and punchiness. But before I talk about that, let me take a question here. It says, I heard the focusing is a bit better on the A7C. Can you comment on your own experience? And that's coming from Herman. I can definitely attribute this A7C camera's focusing ability to be better than the A7 III. You know, it's gone from great to even greater, if that's even possible. But the focusing has been phenomenal with those 693 autofocus detection points. It really also has that real-time autofocus, eye autofocus in particular, which meant, you know, my models were like two different worlds. The one model was kind of very stoic and still and wouldn't move unless you directed her, and the other model was the polar opposite. She would kind of move around and dance, so that real-time tracking, if we were doing the video, was really phenomenal, and the real-time eye autofocus was also incredible. But that was all attributed to those 693 detection points. So there's your answer, Herman. It's gone from great to greater on the A7SC. So make sure you get it and try it for yourself, because it really is phenomenal. Great. Another image that played on the low light scenario, and something that was important for me here was the 5-axis built into the camera body, and that steady shot inside made sure these images had no camera shake. I wasn't worried about unintentionally giving it shake, because if you look at my portfolio, I do like to play with delayed shutters. But in this instance, you know, I could stop down that shutter and still get the sharpness that I got in these images, and get the definition, and get the saturation, and get the definition. And by the way, these were edited in JPEG, because the raw files, obviously, when we were shooting, hadn't been released. The codec hadn't been released, and so now I'm really interested and curious and excited to get back into some of these files in raw mode and play with all that extra data and the extra information that's going to be available in them. Cool. Something else that I wanted to play with this image, and this image was inspired, I'm sure you have seen it somewhere, is the Miles Davis. It's his hands, weathered hands, where he's kind of just moving them in and out because he's obviously been working and living his whole life whenever they're taking those photos. But what I wanted to test taking these photos of the model's hand was very simple. It was the 10 frames per second, and I did that in many bursts. There wasn't lag. It was, you know, it caught up, or it was present in real time as I photographed these kind of movements of the model's hand, which is something I'm also familiar with because I speak with my hands a lot. So that 10 frames per second was phenomenal. It was really fun to use and to test it out so practically, and to pay homage to, you know, someone that I admire, that is Miles Davis. Okay, something else that is kind of critical when you're taking photos is battery life. So this was towards the end of the shoot, but what was really incredible was that the Sony A7C has, if I can remember the exact number, it's about 740 shots that you can take before the battery runs down. And by this time, I think I was on 500 or 600 images that I'd photographed, and the Z battery was still phenomenal. It still had a lot of power in it. I didn't have to change it out during the course of the day, and this was during probably what was about a 10-hour shoot day. So that was really incredible. And you know, that becomes important if you're shooting, especially in remote places, and you might not have access to charge points. The Z battery becomes a godsend, and these images kind of hold a place in my heart because, you know, we didn't have to rely on charge in the studio, worry about X, Y, and Z. We could just focus on the shooting and let the battery kind of do its own work. Cool. Before I jump onto that next image to talk about the weirdness, I'm going to check in for some questions. There's a question from Matt. Hey Matt, how you doing? Oh, Matt says the lighting is fire. Thank you. Not too bad for a first timer. I'm going to walk towards the light after this. And then from Esley saying he loves the image. Thank you, Esley. I do like to experiment and, you know, experiment and express myself, hence the name The Expressionist. And this is, I guess, the perfect example on this slide that speaks to that duality and the contrast. So on the left is a crystal clear, pristine, sharp, noiseless image shot in very low key or low light. And on the left is, again, and it might be flipped for you guys because I just realized everything is mirrored. So if it is, you'll know what I mean. The distorted image, also shot in low light, and I got the distortion that I wanted using that extra glass, but I didn't have to worry about noise. I didn't have to worry about distortion from the shutter itself, only because I wanted to create it as a form of expression. And thank you for the comments, guys. I do appreciate them. These are going to get more elaborate as we go on, so get ready for me doing crazy things. I think I'll get livestock in here. I'm going to get sheep. I'm going to get bubbles. It's going to become quite theatrical as we progress through anytime I do live streams. So make sure you stay tuned in because the entertainment value is going to shoot through the roof. For now, you have to bear with my radio face on a live stream where you have to see it. Let me check in on the questions one more time to see if there's anything new. Cool. There's a couple of questions I'm going to mull over as I transition into the next kind of project that I worked on. And this was actually the first project that I worked on when I had the A7C. And this is called Abazali. And if you don't speak Zulu, which is a native tongue of South Africa, one of our 11 official languages, this means parents. And, you know, I've been going through kind of a phase because of COVID-19 and having been isolated for about 4 months and not visiting people, where I didn't want to, you know, endanger anyone, stay at home, wear a mask, etc. And when we were allowed to kind of go out to see people again, the first thought that I had was obviously to go see my parents, and that's what I went to do. And the first, I guess, real shoot I wanted to do with the A7C was to pay homage to them, and this is the shoot that it was. So those are my parents. You can see them there, and the concept for the shoot was to kind of get them to wear my clothes. So I went there with my freshly laundered clothes because of COVID. Always have to give that disclaimer now when you do anything. And I styled them in kind of my modern clothes, which is very different to what they would normally wear, just to, you know, have fun with it and give them an excuse to be cool parents, quote unquote. And so what we did was kind of shoot around my parents' house, styling them in a variety of looks. And if you look on my Instagram and Twitter at whatever stage, you'll get a good sense of those images. Funny enough, what was really fun to do with my parents, and maybe I'll release it at some point, was shooting them and shooting video with them in 4K, which, you know, the 7AC or the A7C, tongue twister, A7C really makes movie making creative and fun. So I'm really keen to share that. Whether you're doing the slow motion or the quick motion, if you kind of, you know, want to do that staccato kind of feel. I experimented with a lot of that with my parents. So yeah, I'm keen to share that at a later stage, so make sure you stay tuned. Again, just playing around with my parents, you know, hopefully they get featured on Hypebeast one of these days because of their awesome looks. That's where I get it from. But what I again want to emphasize, you know, about the A7C and working in a kind of more fluid way where I didn't have assistants and setups was the lightweightness. Fun fact, by the way, is that the A7C is 22% lighter than the A7 III, and that's with a memory card and a battery, which again, you know, makes moving in and out of scenarios much easier, much more fluid. And it's almost as if people take you less seriously, which is a great thing when you want to shoot on the street or you want to shoot in very non-traditional spaces where, you know, if you went in there with a bulky body of a camera, they were going to go, "You need to leave, sir," and show you the door. So we don't have that problem with the A7C because it's compact, it's light, it's portable, and for me, perfect for travel. And I'm going to be traveling very soon, hopefully in the next month or two, as restrictions get eased, so I can go, you know, see the world, see my significant other, and really play around with it. Also, by the way, on the video, while I'm still talking about it, S-Lock 2 and 3 and HLG on the A7C if you are more focused as a video shooter. Okay, let's see what my parents have to say. Yeah, again, just playing around with my parents. And by the way, my dad is 70 and my mom is 64. So do with that information what you will. I probably shouldn't have given away my mom's age. That's my bad, Mom. I'm sorry. Again, just taking you through, you know, portraiture becomes a critical thing for me because it's kind of how, you know, I started photography. The camera was an excuse for me to contact and connect with people, because it's almost like a barrier remover, even though, you know, the camera is kind of this object between you and the subject that you're photographing. But for me, portraiture has always been key, especially the eyes. And again, with the real-time eye autofocus on this camera, I cannot sing its praises enough, because shooting becomes such a breeze where I can have conversations with my subjects, and what I like to do is catch them in a moment and click the shutter or ask them to hold. And especially when I'm shooting a really shallow depth of field, if I'm at f1.8 or 2 or f2.8, it becomes really easy to not worry about missing focus, because I know it's going to lock into those eyes and take the photographs. And my nieces and nephews, I think are at the phase where they want to get animals. And if you are an animal lover and your animal has an Instagram or a Facebook page or whatever, this camera also has real-time tracking for animals. So if your little kitty cat or your little puppy, you want to do super cool videos and you're worried that they're always moving around, the A7C's got your back. It's going to make it really fluid and really fun to do. All right, and then the last project that I'm going to talk about is a friend of mine who's a clothing designer. Her name is Shelly. And before we do that, I'm going to take some questions from Fatima. She says, "We love Crazy Anthony." I think that's just crazy nerves, Fatima, but thank you. I think by the 10th or 11th live stream, I'm probably going to be low energy, low impact, like a sloth. I'll probably be in my pajamas, just kind of, being very casual about it. But for the first one, I'm amped, I'm excited, and I'm really appreciative to be part of the Sony Alpha family doing my first live stream the day after a public holiday. So I'm surprised there are people listening and watching at all, because we had Heritage Day yesterday, which was the 24th of September. And if you don't know, South Africa has a multitude of tribes and cultures and tongues, and on Heritage Day we celebrate everything about those cultures. We dress up in traditional wear, we have braais, otherwise known as barbecues or barbies, and we celebrate our heritage and our culture and where we come from. So don't forget that. But yes, moving on to my last project. I've actually photographed more projects on the Sony A7C, but I'm saving those for a rainy day as I work, so make sure you stay tuned for those at a later stage. And then Gregory's asked me if I do live music photography. Greg, I did live music photography in the beginning of my career, and what I've done now is moved more into documentary photography of live acts that I want to follow in a documentary sense. So I do live music photography, but for specific artists and acts, because I want to build bodies of works around these acts that I believe in. But in the beginning, I was, in the cheap seats, in the nosebleed seats with the 70 to 200, wading through people. And, hopefully we can actually have live events the way that we used to in the next couple of months to maybe early next year, because that is a bygone thing, unfortunately, due to COVID. So with this shoot, I actually drove out to somewhere called The Vaal, which is about 60 kilometers away from where I live, and you can hear a plane flying overhead, because I'm living near the airport, so that as soon as borders open up, I can go to the Maldives or to Lamu or somewhere tropical, because as much as I love South Africa, I need a holiday from my apartment. It's been a long time. But getting back to the project with Shelly called Conade, which is her clothing label. We decided to drive out to her hometown, which is about 60 kilometers outside of Johannesburg. As you can see, it is strewn with sheep and goats and livestock, and what we did is kind of dress her in her own clothing and test out the A7C in a variety of environments. This was a very well lit area. It was sunny, and the camera still performed phenomenally well. I still can't get over the fact that it's an A7C body, which is round about the same size as the A6600, I would say, more or less, but it's full frame, so it makes capturing images all the more exciting and all the more broad, because you have so much more space to work with when you're shooting full frame as opposed to APS-C. Which I still love, by the way. APS-C is where I started out when I was shooting 35mm back in the day. Again, portraiture shots, playing with light and shadow with Shelly, and she does pretty well for a clothing designer to be in front of the camera, and she was wearing leather on a very hot day. So thank you, Shelly, for your sacrifice. It does not go unappreciated. Again, getting Shelly to move around and play around with the eye autofocus. And as you can see, funny anecdotes about the picture with Shelly's hands that are up is what I would normally do is focus in on her face and then ask her to raise her hand to focus in on the eyes. And because I was testing out the real-time eye autofocus on the A7C, I just told her to move around and play with her hands, and the camera still caught her eyes, even with all that foreground, midground, and then obviously the background of her actual eyes. And I was just blown away with the ability of the camera to handle even testing situations like that. This is just kind of a broad wide shot that I wanted to capture, the town that Shelley comes from, to show the telephone wires, the houses in the back, but also just, the vastness of small town living. And again, full frame camera gave me so much latitude and space. It made it really fun and easy to capture that space. And also, by the way, the color science, that's something that cannot go without saying, is the color science on the A7C is phenomenal, especially with darker skin tones. Many cameras don't necessarily cater to it as well as they should, and a lot of these images, all I did was punch some contrast in because I was shooting in neutral, and that's all I did. I didn't retouch anything. I didn't bump anything up too much when it comes to vibrance or saturation. But the color science itself was doing so much work to show this dynamic range, to show this richness and these tonalities in black skin, which is awesome, which is something that I love and appreciate. Just checking in for questions one more time here before I move on to the next thing. The questions are still good for now. Awesome. Cool. And then, this is my last slide when it comes to the kind of shots and 3 projects that I did on the A7C. 3 very different projects, 3 very different vibes. But again, just showcasing the landscape, and all of these images again are in JPEG. So talk to me in another month when I've had time to work through the raw files. And I've printed and blown these up and maybe made a zine or an exhibition, because I think as much as we live in a digital world, there's nothing that beats physical touch, and I really want to print these images and see how they transition into live viewing and into the physical gallery space. So look out for some really abstract photography from me when it comes to that. It's going to be fun. Okay, it's time to see my ugly mug again. We're almost going to sign out, so I want to thank everyone who's participated, who's asked me questions. Feel free to visit my Instagram at The Expressionist, or my Twitter, Anthony Bila, if you have any additional questions on the Sony A7C. If you want to just collaborate, if you want to ask more questions about the camera, I live to serve. That is what I live to do, and I'm excited to explore this journey with everybody on the camera, on the Sony Alpha universe, and with my collaborators and fellow Sony ambassadors. I do also work as a director, so there's some stuff that we're working on and shooting that I'm keen to share with you. That's going to come very soon, but this is me signing off. But before I do, I just want to remind you of the Sony cashback program. So again, before I leave and love you, or love and leave you, 10% cashback on Sony products. The code is ANT01. It's valid for 15 days as of today, so make sure you are super aware of that. And once you've purchased your goods, again, take your invoice information, punch it into cashback.co.za, and within 2 weeks you will be reimbursed what you've paid. And I'll just run through those 10, not even 10, there's actually less, those cameras and lenses that do not apply to this, and that is the 400mm f2.8, the 600mm f4, the A9 Mark II, the A7R3, the A7S3, and the A7C. So those cameras, you cannot get the 10% cash back, but the camera pays for itself, so why would you want it? But yeah, I'm out of here. I'm loving and leaving you. Thank you for joining me on my first live stream. Look forward to more. Have fun on your, I'm guessing it's Friday just about everywhere, unless you're in Asia, then it might be Saturday. But Happy weekend either way. Take care. I'm signing out.